My mother looked me straight in the eyes, in front of my whole family, and told everyone at that table I was the biggest disappointment she ever raised. Nobody laughed. Nobody gasped. That's what got me. Everybody just kept eating like she'd commented on the weather, like this was normal, like this was just Tuesday dinner talk. I want to tell you what led up to that moment, and what happened after, because I think a lot of you know exactly what it feels like to sit at a table where you're the only one who doesn't belong. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows your business before you do. Two brothers, one sister, and a mother who ran that house like she was keeping score on a scoreboard only she could see. I was the middle kid. If you're a middle kid, you already know what that means. You're not the miracle firstborn and you're not the surprise baby everybody dotes on. You're just there, filling space between two more interesting stories. My older brother was the golden one. Straight A's without trying, quarterback of the JV team, the kind of kid teachers wrote letters about. My little sister was the baby, and babies get away with everything. That left me somewhere in the middle, trying to figure out where I fit. I used to think I just needed to try harder. That's what you tell yourself as a kid, right? If I get better grades, if I win this award, if I make the team, she'll finally look at me the way she looks at him. It never worked. I brought home a B+ in algebra once, worked myself half to death for that grade, and she glanced at it for 2 seconds and said, "Your brother never got a B in his life." That was it. That was the whole conversation. You'd think one comment like that wouldn't stick with a person for 30 years, but it does. It sits in you like a splinter that never quite works its way out. Here's the thing nobody tells you about favoritism in a family. It's not always loud. It's not always obvious. Most of the time it's quiet. It's in the way she'd ask my brother about his day and just nod at whatever I said. It's in the way she'd frame his school photos and mine would end up in a drawer somewhere. I remember being maybe 9 years old, watching her hang his art project on the refrigerator. Mine was sitting right there on the counter. She just never picked it up. I asked her once why his was on the fridge and mine wasn't, and she said, "Because his is good, honey." Just like that. Like it was a fact of nature. Like some kids are just good and some aren't. You learn to stop asking after a while. You learn to keep your accomplishments to yourself, because bringing them to her only confirmed how little they mattered. My dad wasn't a bad man, but he wasn't going to fight her on any of this either. He worked long hours at the plant, came home tired, and mostly just wanted peace in the house. If that meant staying quiet while she picked apart one of her own kids, that's what he did. I don't blame him for it anymore. I understand now that some men just don't know how to stand in the middle of something like that. But back then, his silence felt like agreement. There were small warning signs all along, if I'm being honest. Little moments that should have told me exactly where I stood, but I kept explaining them away because the alternative was too painful to sit with. Like the time I made varsity soccer my sophomore year, I ran home to tell her, out of breath, grinning like an idiot. She was on the phone with my aunt and just held up a finger for me to wait. I stood there for 10 minutes. When she finally got off the phone, I told her the news again. She said, "That's nice," and asked if I'd taken the trash out yet. Or my high school graduation. My brother had graduated 2 years before me, and she'd rented out half a restaurant for his party. Mine was cake in the backyard with maybe 12 people, half of them neighbors she'd invited out of obligation. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I wasn't the type who needed a big party anyway. But somewhere inside, that 9-year-old kid with the art project was still keeping count. By the time I hit my 20s, I'd built this whole identity around being the low-maintenance one. The kid who didn't need anything, who didn't cause problems, who just quietly existed in the background of his own family. I thought that made me strong. Looking back, I think it just made me easy to overlook. I went to a state school, studied business, worked 2 jobs to pay for what my scholarship didn't cover. My brother had his tuition handled without a second thought. Nobody ever said it was because he was better. Nobody had to say it. It was just understood. I graduated, got a decent job at a logistics company, started building something for myself. Nothing glamorous, just steady, honest work. I was proud of it. I thought maybe, finally, this would be the thing that changed how she saw me. It wasn't. Every family dinner became the same pattern. My brother would mention some small thing at his job and she'd light up like he'd cured a disease. I'd mention a promotion, a raise, anything, and she'd nod and change the subject within 30 seconds. My sister noticed it too, eventually. She pulled me aside once at Thanksgiving and said, "You know she does that to you on purpose, right?" I told her I didn't know what she meant. I knew exactly what she meant. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. The night everything came apart was a Sunday dinner, nothing special about the occasion. My whole family was there, my brother and his wife, my sister and her boyfriend at the time, my dad quiet at the head of the table like always. I just closed on my first house. Small place, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I'd worked 6 years to afford that down payment, and I was proud enough to bring it up at dinner. I said something simple. I said, "I got the keys to the new house this week." I wasn't fishing for a party. I just wanted, for once, for somebody to say congratulations and mean it. My mother set her fork down. She looked at me the way you'd look at someone who just interrupted a conversation that mattered more than whatever they had to say. And then she said it. "Must be nice to finally do something with your life. We were starting to think you'd always be the failure of this family." The table went quiet, but not the kind of quiet that means people are shocked. The kind of quiet that means people have heard this before and are just waiting for it to pass. My sister-in-law looked down at her plate. My dad kept chewing like he hadn't heard a thing. My brother actually let out a short laugh, like it was a joke between old friends. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I remember that specifically because I kept trying to pick my glass back up and I couldn't get a grip on it. I couldn't even finish my sentence. Something about "I just thought" came out and then nothing. My throat just closed up on me. 28 years old, sitting in a dining room I used to call home, and I felt about 9 years old again, standing in front of a refrigerator with no room left for my art project. I want to be honest with you. I didn't storm out. I didn't yell. I wish I could tell you I said something powerful in that moment, something that shut the whole table up and made her feel an ounce of what she just made me feel. I didn't. I just sat there, and I finished the meal because leaving felt like it would somehow prove her right. But something in me broke that night. Not in a dramatic way, more like a switch flipping off somewhere deep down. I remember driving home afterward, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, and just asking myself one question over and over. Why do I keep coming back for more of this? I didn't have an answer that night. It took me a few more weeks to find one. I want to pause here and just say something to anyone listening who's been in a room like that, where someone who's supposed to love you unconditionally says something in front of everyone that cuts you open, and everybody just keeps eating like nothing happened. If that's ever been you, I need you to know it wasn't your fault. Whatever she saw in me that made her say that, it was never really about me at all. It took me years to understand that. I'm going to save you some of that time. The weeks after that dinner were rough. I didn't call her. I didn't call any of them, honestly. My sister reached out a few times and I was polite but distant. I wasn't punishing anybody. I just needed silence for a while. I needed to sit with what had happened without somebody explaining it away for me. I started seeing a counselor, which wasn't something I ever thought I'd do. Grew up in a house where you didn't talk about feelings, you just pushed through them. But I sat in that office once a week and slowly started untangling 30 years of thinking I wasn't enough. One thing my counselor said stuck with me more than anything else. She said, "Favoritism isn't about the favored child being better. It's about the parent needing someone to elevate and someone to compare them to." That one sentence rearranged something in my head. My brother wasn't better than me. He was just cast in a role, same as I was. Neither one of us chose those roles. She assigned them to us before we were old enough to have any say in it. I decided, somewhere in those months, that I was done auditioning for a part I was never going to get. Not the part of the favorite, not even the part of the acceptable one. I was just going to build a life, quietly, on my own terms, and stop waiting for her approval to validate it. That decision changed everything, even though nothing on the outside looked different at first. I kept working my job. I kept fixing up my little house. I started reading books about business and investing on nights I used to spend rehearsing conversations with my mother in my head, trying to figure out what I could have said differently. About a year after that dinner, a coworker mentioned his brother was starting a small logistics consulting business and needed a partner who understood operations. I almost said no. Old habits die hard, and some part of me still expected failure to find me eventually, like she'd promised. But I said yes instead. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it turned into some overnight miracle. It didn't. The first year was brutal. Long nights, thin margins, more stress than I'd ever carried in my life. But it was mine. Every win belonged to me. Every mistake taught me something instead of confirming something she'd already decided about me. 3 years in, we'd grown from two guys working out of a spare office to a company with 15 employees, and contracts with companies I used to only read about. I bought a second property, this one an investment. I started actually sleeping through the night for the first time in years. During all of this, I kept my distance from most of my family. Not out of anger exactly, more like self-preservation. My dad passed away during that second year, which was its own kind of grief I won't get into here, but I'll say this. Standing at his funeral, I realized how much of my life I'd spent trying to earn something from people who were never going to give it freely, and how much time that had cost me with people who actually did love me the right way. Word travels in families, even quiet ones. My sister told me later that my mother had heard about the business doing well, heard about the second property, heard, eventually, that I'd been asked to speak at a regional business conference about scaling small logistics operations. She didn't hear any of it from me. I wasn't calling to report my life to her anymore. But apparently it changed something. My sister called me one afternoon and said Mom wanted to see me. Said she'd been asking about me at family gatherings I wasn't attending anymore. Said she wanted to clear the air. I sat with that for a long time before I responded. Part of me wanted to say no immediately. Another part of me, the 9-year-old with the art project still living somewhere inside me, wanted to believe this was finally it. This was the moment she'd say she was proud of me and actually mean it. I agreed to meet her, just the two of us at a coffee shop instead of the family house. I wanted neutral ground. I wanted a conversation with her, not a performance for an audience. She looked older than I remembered. Not in a way that made me feel sorry for her exactly, just older, more tired. We made small talk for a few minutes, the kind of surface-level stuff you do when there's a mountain of real conversation neither person wants to climb first. Eventually she said, "I heard the business is doing well." I told her it was. I kept it simple. I wasn't going to sell my success to her like I used to, hoping she'd finally buy in. She was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table. Then she said, "I probably owe you an apology for some things I've said over the years." I want to tell you my heart leapt at that. Some part of it did. But another part of me, the part that had spent 2 years building a life without her validation, just waited. Because probably is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and I'd learned to listen for the whole sentence, not just the parts that felt good. She continued. She said she'd always been harder on me because she worried about me more. Said my brother just had it easier, and she never had to push him the way she pushed me. Said she never meant the things she said, she just wanted to motivate me. Here's the twist I didn't see coming, and I think you need to hear this part clearly because it's not the twist you're expecting. I wasn't angry sitting there. I thought I would be. I'd rehearsed anger for 2 years. But sitting across from her, Hearing her rewrite 30 years of favoritism into some kind of tough love origin story, I didn't feel rage. I felt something closer to clarity. I realized she wasn't ever going to fully own what she'd done. Not because she was a monster, but because admitting it fully would mean admitting she'd shaped a part of my whole childhood around cruelty she told herself was motivation. That's a hard thing for anybody to sit with, let alone a parent. And I understood, right there in that coffee shop, that I didn't need her to get there for me to be okay. I told her calmly that I appreciated her saying that. And then I told her the truth. I told her that what she said at that dinner didn't motivate me. It nearly broke something in me that took 2 years and a lot of hard work to rebuild. I told her that calling me a failure in front of my whole family wasn't tough love. It was just cruelty with an audience. She didn't argue. She just looked down at her coffee and nodded slowly. It wasn't the dramatic, tearful apology you see in movies. It was quieter than that, more real than that. She said, "I didn't realize how much that stuck with you." I told her it stuck with me because it was never really about that one dinner. It was about 30 years of small moments that all led up to it. We didn't fix everything that day. I want to be honest about that, because I think too many of these stories end with some magical reconciliation that erases years of damage in one conversation, and that's not how real families work. What we did was start being honest with each other for maybe the first time in our lives. Our relationship now isn't what I see in other families. It's not effortless. There are still moments where old patterns try to creep back in, where she'll compare me to my brother without even realizing she's doing it, and I have to gently but firmly remind her that comparison isn't something I'm available for anymore. She's gotten better at catching herself. Not perfect. Better. I still run my business. It's grown more than I ever imagined it would back when I was that quiet middle kid nobody noticed. But the real success, if I'm being honest with you, wasn't the company or the properties or the conference invitations. The real success was learning that my worth was never actually up for a vote at that dinner table. It just took me a long time to stop asking for one. If you're listening to this and you've got a parent, a sibling, anybody in your life who's made you feel like the failure of the family, I want you to hear something clearly. The story they tell about you is not the whole story. It's just the story that made sense to them from wherever they were standing, with whatever they were carrying. It was never the full truth of who you are. You don't need them to rewrite that story for you to start living a different one. You can just start living it. Quietly, if that's what it takes. One decision at a time, 1 year at a time, until one day you look up and realize the failure they described isn't anywhere in the room with you anymore. That's what happened to me. And if I can leave you with one thing tonight, it's this. Some people will only ever see you through the role they assigned you when you were too young to say no to it. Your job isn't to convince them otherwise. Your job is to build a life good enough, honest enough, and steady enough that their opinion simply stops being able to reach you. That's the whole story. Thanks for sitting with me through it.